Um, let's see, there we go. Good evening and welcome to this presentation on Proposition 15. My name is Margot Freistadt, and I'm a longtime member of Shalom, and I serve on several of the committees in the synagogue that focus on social justice issues. And so why is Proposition 15 so important to me? I graduated from high school in California, East Union High School in Manteca, California in 1974, just before Proposition 13 fundamentally changed California's property tax structure. East Union had a school nurse, counselors, driver's ed, art, music, ceramics, science labs, and it all seemed, completely normal. So fast forward about 20 years to the mid-90s, and I have my own little daughter, and she starts kindergarten at Buena Vista Elementary School in San Francisco. And I was like, what happened? It was like there was no school nurse, no counselors, no library. The parents raised money for art, for music, for PE. The parents raised money for the Xerox machine in the office, for the paper, for the Xerox machine. And even while we were having our little holiday gift wrap sales and bake sales and raising money for the stuff for our kids, we were very, very aware that at the schools where the parents didn't have the resources that we did, their kids weren't getting the extras that our kids were getting. So we were actually increasing the inequity in the schools. It was hard work, it was frustrating, and it was ethically uncomfortable. So that happened. So fast forward another 20 years to 2015, and my little daughter's all grown up, and she starts her first job as a school teacher in San Mateo. And no surprise to anybody here, it's even worse now. The class sizes are larger, teacher pay hasn't kept up with the cost of living. There's increasing turnover, meaning less experienced teachers are teaching in more challenging circumstances. Long story short, it's a hot mess. And the fundamental problem is money. Anyway, for at least the past 20 years, since my first little what happened moment, I've been looking for a campaign to restore the funding cuts that Prop 13 did to our schools, to restore some of the funding that Prop 13 stripped from our schools. So, because it's clear to me that that's what happened. So a few years ago, when I heard through Faith in Action that I heard about this campaign, Schools and Communities First, which eventually became Prop 15, I jumped in 100%. I harassed our congregants and my neighbors to collect signatures to get the proposition on the ballot in 2018. And then I harassed everybody again in 2020 to get it on the ballot this year. And now that it's on the ballot, I am all about spreading the word. So that's why I am super thrilled to welcome our speaker tonight, Ben Grief. Ben is the campaign director for Evolve California, which is one of the coalition of groups that makes up the Yes on 15 campaign. So welcome, Ben. So happy to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Margot. I really appreciate you organizing this. Thank you, everyone, and Lashana Tova to folks out there. I'm really excited always to speak to groups. I'm very excited to speak to this faith community this evening. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later because Prop 15 is really about our values. I first got involved in this campaign, this effort 7 years ago. Where it's been a long time coming. Folks here might remember when Prop 13 passed back in 1978. And really since then, there's been a big idea out there to make it better, and to make it so, it was really about its original intent, which was to keep individuals in their homes rather than, unfortunately, what it has been, and I'll talk more about that. But, much like Margot, I come at this through an education lens. Our organization works to increase funding for education in California because, unfortunately, we're an embarrassing 39th out of 50 states in how much we spend per student. And this is something where, unless we get to the root cause of this issue, we're really never going to get where we want to be, where we need to be, and where all our really students deserve. My mom was a special education teacher for 35 years. I remember my first political action was when the teachers in our school district went on strike when I was in first grade. And I went and marched with her so, they could get, fair pay back then. And it's really sad to sort of fast forward, 20 or 30 years later now, and to see that our teachers here in California are still having to go on strike to fight for a living wage. And that's why this campaign is really so important to me. Also Jewish, and so I'm raised with Jewish values, sort of thinking about this from a moral and ethical standpoint. And it is something where also being raised Jewish, I understand the value of education, and how critical that is, and how in our state, unfortunately, we are not giving everyone those opportunities that I had growing up in a better funded public school system. And that to me is just not right. So I'm really excited to walk you through tonight the issue of Prop 15, what we're working to change. Also, just as importantly, what we're not working to change with this initiative. I want to go over some, misinformation that's out there right now. I'm sure some folks have started to see ads around this campaign. I definitely want to answer any questions. I have been doing a lot of presentations around this, so I try to answer a lot of the frequently asked questions during my remarks. But if anything does come up, feel free to put that in the chat, and we can answer that either during the chat. Emily can help with those, or I can answer that afterwards in the Q&A. But if there also are other questions, we definitely want to have plenty of time to answer those in the Q&A. So I'm going to get started here with my PowerPoint presentation. Really, this initiative is also called the Schools and Communities First Initiative. It was put on the ballot through citizen signatures. Margot mentioned she helped with signatures. We collected over 400,000 signatures through volunteers all across the state. This is really an initiative that has been led from the grassroots, from community organizations, from faith-based groups, from labor unions. This is something that, unfortunately, the folks up in Sacramento, never really were able to muster up the support to actually get this on the ballot. So this had to come really from the grassroots, and we're excited to see where we are right now. But the first thing, if you remember one thing that I mentioned here tonight, it's that Prop 15 will not change anything for any sort of residential property whatsoever. If someone lives in a property, nothing will change for that whatsoever. We're really talking about single family homes, apartment homes, mobile homes, assisted living facilities, live work spaces. If you have a business that you run out of your home, nothing will change for your property taxes. So this is the number one thing that everyone here should remember, and hopefully can tell other folks about this initiative, because there is quite a bit of misinformation out there being put forth by the other side. And this is something that, we realize the only way that they can actually win is by trying to trick people and trying to use these scare tactics. And so that's why this is really the most important thing for folks to understand. Really what we are working to change with Prop 15 is the completely out of whack commercial property tax system that we have in California. Right now we have a situation where, Disneyland is still paying property taxes based on what their land was valued in the 1970s, versus your average California homeowner who's paying 8 times more in property taxes than the Walt Disney Corporation. Right? This is why this comes down to our values, right? It's like we are allowing one of the wealthiest corporations in the world to save millions of dollars every year because of this loophole in our property tax system. And that's all Prop 15 is really working to change. We're also talking about Chevron. They're the 33rd largest corporation in the world, and they're undertaxed by over $100 million every single year. Right? This is certainly not the California values that we all really subscribe to. This situation is where that $100 million should be going back into our schools and our communities. So when you think about Prop 15, really think about these examples. And when you're talking to other folks about this, really let them know this is really what we're trying to change. But we also have some less known examples. This is a Skyline of Oakland. And we took a look at the different property taxes that were being paid by several different buildings in Oakland. And what you can see here is the Bank of America building is paying $71 per square foot for their land. While you're over here at 1330 Broadway, they're paying $472 per square foot for their land. And now this is just the land value. This is not what they're paying on the buildings. And all of this, these examples here are clustered within the same 2 blocks of downtown Oakland around the BART station. So there's absolutely no reason that we should have this much of a divergence in how much folks are paying per square foot in property taxes. And that is what we're working to change. Again, this is just a common sense initiative that would make it so all large commercial property owners would just pay property taxes at fair market value. And the reason that this is currently the case, and that we have these examples, is that in California, properties are only reassessed when they change hands. So we have some large commercial properties, you know, the Bank of America building in Oakland or Chevron or Disney, that rarely change hands. And so this means they're not paying their fair share in property taxes. And so that is our current system, and Prop 15 is working to change that. But it's not just, you know, large corporations or big skyscrapers really that are robbing our schools of, you know, billions of dollars every year. You know, it's also individuals, you know, wealthy investors. Folks might be familiar with Michael Dell. He was the founder of, or is the founder of Dell Computers. And he bought a hotel for $200 million in Santa Monica. But instead of buying the hotel outright, what he did is he split up the purchase of the hotel, as you can see here, and between his wife and a shell company. And so what's going on there is that nobody owns more than 50% of that property. That's because under our current property tax system, if no one owns 50% or more of a property when it's transferred, it doesn't technically change hands. So he was able to save $2 million a year in property taxes. And when he bought this hotel, he was the 18th richest person in the world, right? So that's $2 million a year going back into the pocket of the 18th richest person in the world. And meanwhile, our schools, as I mentioned, are ranked 39th in the nation in education funding. This is what Prop 15 is working to change. But aside from just the fact that it's robbing our schools and local governments of billions of dollars every year, you know, people also have to understand that because large corporations aren't paying their fair share, we all have to pay more. You know, you might talk to folks, or you might feel this way yourself, that, you know, California is a high tax state. And the truth is, it is. We have the highest income tax rate in the country. We have the highest sales tax rate in the country, the second highest gas tax in the country. And year after year, especially here in San Francisco, we are asked to pass local revenues. We're asked to pass bond measures and parcel taxes and sales tax increases just to fund our schools and our communities at the minimal acceptable standard. And so this is really what Prop 15 is working to do. What we have seen over the last 42 years is that the tax burden in California has shifted from those who can afford to pay it the most, large commercial property owners, onto individuals and working families and small businesses. So that's what we're working to change here with Prop 15. One of the reasons why this is so critical now, and this is prior to COVID, I'll certainly talk about COVID later, but prior to COVID, we had, on the March 3rd election, you can see here we had 39% of local revenue measures pass in California. You know, this is the same ballot where there was a contested Democratic primary, where Bernie Sanders, certainly the most progressive candidate, got the most votes in the state. But at the same time, you saw we had a 42% decrease in the passage rate of revenue measures at the local level, right? And this is prior to COVID. So what we've been able to do to sort of skate by and to fill in the gaps of large commercial property owners not paying their fair share, it seems to be quickly coming to an end. And now where we are with the economic downturn that we're facing, we're going to be in even a worse spot to tax ourselves to make up for the loss of revenue. And that's why now Prop 15 is more important than ever. So specifically, Prop 15 will reclaim $12 billion a year going to our schools and our communities. 40% of the money will go to our K through 12 schools and our community colleges. 60% of the revenue will go to our cities and our counties and our special districts. Examples of special districts are like a water district or a fire district. And again, this initiative protects all residential property. It also protects all agriculture property. There's a lot of misinformation about that out there as well. Simply by closing this loophole that we have in our commercial and industrial property tax system. But something that's really important as well is this initiative provides the largest tax cut for small businesses in a generation. We are going to be eliminating the tax on personal business equipment for small businesses in California. For folks that are unfamiliar with this tax, it's a cumbersome tax. It's a nuisance tax for small businesses. It requires that they, if you're a restaurant owner, for example, have to count up all your silverware, all your tables, your chairs, your pots, your pans, your ovens, your refrigerators, all of your business equipment. And you have to pay a tax on that every year. This tax brings in hundreds of millions of dollars every year. It's a perfect example of how we have to nickel and dime individuals and small business owners just to make ends meet in California. But with $12 billion a year of reliable, stable property tax revenue coming in, this is the type of tax that we can eliminate. And especially now when we're worried about our small businesses, this comes at a perfect time. And of course, Prop 15 ensures strict transparency and strict accountability. We know specifically how much money is estimated to go to local governments and schools, school districts all across the state. And so we also are mandating that if a school district receives X amount of dollars every year from Prop 15 revenue, they will have to say what they spent that money on. If the city gets X amount of dollars every year, they'll have to say, well, this is what we did with our extra money from Prop 15. So also important to note that this really is strict transparency and accountability built into the measure. So I mentioned we know specifically how much money is coming to our local areas, $4.6 billion every year for the Bay Area, $500 million for schools and the city and county of San Francisco. And again, it really can't be said enough for folks. This is without increasing our taxes. We are fortunate in a sort of a perverse way to have an opportunity to generate all this revenue in this time of economic crisis without increasing taxes on your everyday Californian. So really important to know this is reliable, stable money. This is a lot of money, and this is also on a yearly basis. And as commercial property taxes have not gone up with the amount of, or the price of commercial property and the land values that have increased over the last 40 years, this will actually fix that system. And so as land values continue to increase in California, our local governments, our schools will be able to see requisite revenue coming in. So this is not a temporary Band-Aid. This is not a stopgap measure. This is something that we're going to be seeing from now in perpetuity. So I just gave a lot of great information about this initiative, but I do want to always take time to talk about what our opponents are going to be saying about this. The number one thing, as I mentioned, they're going to say this is somehow going to hurt homeowners, or this is a slippery slope. We're going to win this now, and then next year we're going to come back and take away property tax protections for homeowners. That could not be farther from the truth. As I mentioned earlier, I've been working on this issue for 7 years. I've been up and down the state, talking to folks, talking to groups about this. And, our coalition, has 1,300 endorsers, organizations, all across the state. And not one of those organizations is talking about changing anything on the residential property tax side, right? When you hear that, no, that's just a scare tactic. That's just a lie. Because when Prop 13 passed in 1978, it passed with 64% of the vote, right? It was a huge win. Today, it's even more popular. So not only is no organization thinking about touching the residential side of Prop 13, But even if someone was, they would have to convince a majority of California voters, which the majority of those folks are homeowners, to increase taxes on themselves. So don't believe the lies, don't believe the scare tactics on that. The other thing they're going to say is that this is going to cause businesses to leave California. Again, that could not be further from the truth. 92% of the revenue that will be generated from Prop 15 is coming from just 10% of commercial properties in California. So I'll say that again, 92% of the $12 billion that's going to go back to our schools and communities is coming from just 10% of commercial properties in California. That's because most commercial properties are already paying property taxes at fair market value. It's only a small minority of commercial properties that haven't been reassessed in 3 or 4 decades. You know, to give a local example, the Transamerica Pyramid versus the Salesforce Tower, right? Obviously, the Salesforce Tower did not exist in 1978. The Transamerica Pyramid did. So the Transamerica Pyramid, for the last 40 years, has been paying property taxes based on 1975 land values. Salesforce Tower, of course, is paying fair market value and property taxes. You know, this is true of all the land that Google's buying in San Jose, or Facebook's campus, or Apple's second campus. So really, the job creators of today and tomorrow are not benefiting from this loophole in our property tax system. So the idea that, you know, businesses are going to up and leave California is completely false. You know, when I show the buildings in Oakland, you know, you can talk about the skyscrapers in LA, you can talk about, you know, Tahoe ski mountains. They can't just get up and move to another state, right? It's land, you know, they're fixed here. So again, it's just a lie and a scare tactic, because this is not a uniform tax on all businesses, and it's not even a uniform tax on all commercial properties. So really important to know that. And the other thing that they're really going to try to convince voters of is that this is going to somehow increase the price of goods and services. And that also could not be farther from the truth. You know, the fact of the matter is property taxes have absolutely no bearing on the cost of goods and services in California or anywhere else. If that was the case, then all of us would be going to the Trader Joe's that was still paying 1970s property taxes to go buy milk. But we know that's not the case, because the price of milk at every Trader Joe's in the Bay Area is roughly the same, no matter how much they're paying in property taxes at each location. And then what holds true for every Safeway or every Whole Foods or any other grocery store that you are looking to go to. You know, again, price of goods and services does not have any relation to the property taxes that are being paid. You know, another example is gas. You know, people say, oh, well, it's, you know, $100 million that Chevron's going to have to pay, so we're all going to have to pay more. But if you can see here, this is at 19th and Judah in the Sunset. And, you know, look at the property taxes that Chevron is paying versus what the gas station across the street are paying. And then look at the price of gas. So clearly, this corporate loophole that's saving Chevron $100 million every year is not being passed on to the consumer. And we have hundreds of examples of gas stations like this all over the state, where a Chevron is paying 20 times less in property taxes than their competitor across the street, but most of the time their gas is more expensive. So these are the types of examples that you want to be thinking about and sharing with your friends, your family, and your neighbors when they are a little bit nervous about Prop 15 or hear some of the ads on the radio or TV or on social media that's trying to scare them into thinking that somehow this is going to increase the cost of goods and services. And, you know, finally, I always like to say a word about, you know, rents. Rents are also based on the market. You know, every commercial, you know, tenant is paying rents based on fair market value, not based on the property taxes that the landlord is paying. Because if this corporate loophole was keeping rents down, then California should have some of the lowest commercial rents in the country. But of course, we know that's not the case. So don't believe the lies and the scare tactics. You know, remember that, you know, this initiative is about bringing the desperately needed funding we need back to our schools and our communities. Because, you know, it's going to fund parks, libraries, our first responders, emergency services. This is money that can be used for affordable housing, public transportation and for filling our potholes. You know, I always like to take a moment here to mention we are the 5th largest economy in the world, and yet we can't fill our own potholes. You know, there was a group in Oakland that were filling their own potholes under the cover of darkness at night. They were called the Pothole Vigilantes. And the idea that we live in the 5th largest economy in the world and we are having people go out under the cover of darkness to fill potholes is shameful, right? But that's what happens when you lose $150 billion over the last 40 years because we're giving an enormous tax break to large commercial property owners. And this is an enormous tax break that large commercial property owners would not get elsewhere in California. You know, I always tell people, all Prop 15 is looking to do is to put our state on par with how the rest of the country taxes their commercial property. That's it. You know, this isn't some radical, Berkeley Bay Area left-wing idea. What we're working to do here by passing Prop 15 is just to make it so California has the same commercial property tax system that they do in Texas or Alabama or Mississippi or Oklahoma. That's it. While also still maintaining the very low rate of 1%, right? We are going to have one of the lowest property tax rates in the country once Prop 15 passes. We will maintain that 1% rate. So this is not a tax increase, right? We are not increasing the rate to what they have in Texas, which is like 2.5%, or what they have in New York, which is about 4%. We're going to keep that low rate. We're just saying it's about time that large commercial property owners, like Donald Trump, who has a 30% stake in 555 California downtown, pay their fair share. That's all. That's all this is. It's such a common sense initiative. It's sometimes frustrating that it's met with such opposition and so much money being poured into the other side, because that's really all we're working to do right now is just put our state on par with what they do in the rest of the country. And I'll also mention, because I forgot earlier, that this initiative clearly states that we will only reassess commercial properties that are valued at over $3 million. And the majority of commercial properties in California are actually valued at less than $3 million. So this is something where we're going to still keep protections for smaller commercial properties. I want to take a moment to share with you some of our supporters for this initiative, to show you, how widely our support is on this. We've got the Democratic Party, we've got the PTA, the League of Women Voters, we've got the ACLU, we've got teachers, we've got nurses, we've got the firefighters, and we've got Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders. Governor Newsom recently came on board to endorse Prop 15, and of course, pretty much every elected leader in San Francisco is behind this. We got resolutions passed at the Board of Supervisors unanimously. And if anyone follows San Francisco Board of Supervisors, they don't really do anything unanimously. So that's really how common sense this really is. Same with the Board of Education and the Community College Board. So it's just something that's great for California. It's great for San Francisco. $500 million coming in now is desperately needed. And that's why we have so much support here. As well as throughout the Bay Area and the state. So I want to take a moment to, pause, because I want to take some questions. I just threw a lot of information at everyone and, gave a lot of background and sort of why this is important. But I just really want to talk about how Prop 15 is really about our values. For 42 years, our state, for some reason, has chosen to value tax loopholes for wealthy commercial property owners over funding our schools and public services, right? I remember, I'm from Seattle. I remember hearing a story when I was growing up on NPR of someone who moved from Seattle when they were in high school to come to California to make sure they could establish residency and to get in-state tuition to go to Cal. Because throughout the rest of the country, the idea was that California had the best public education system in the world, right? And what I have seen since moving here 12 years ago is that public education system has gotten less and less funded every single year, right? And the quality of education has gone downhill. And we've all heard, stories about teachers not being able to afford to continue to work and live in San Francisco or really, elsewhere in the Bay Area because they're not being paid adequately. We're hearing what is going on right now with COVID and trying to, at some point, come back to in-person classes, but that is going to cost an incredible amount of money. We have to make sure that people are safe when they come back. And, you talk to teachers, there's no hot water or soap in the bathrooms. And that's the one thing that we're all told to do in a pandemic is to wash our hands with hot water and soap. But if we can't even provide that in our schools, how are we going to safely have students come back? And so this is just about what do we value in California. We like to think of ourselves as the progressive leader, right? We like to think of ourselves as better than other places in the rest of the country, that we're sort of the leader of the resistance. But how can we really think that? How can we really feel that in our heart of hearts when we are funding our schools at a lower rate than they do in Alabama? Right? That's something we all should be thinking about right now. These are the days of awe. This is the time for reflection. This is the time to look inward at ourselves, but also it's a time to be thinking about our greater community and our greater society. And how can we make things a little bit better for folks that live in our city, in our county, in our region, in our state? And what I'm saying to you is this is the easiest, most direct, and most important way that you can have a huge impact on your state and your community, right? It's by voting yes on Prop 15, but also getting involved in the campaign, right? This is something where we are being outspent 2-to-1 by large commercial property owners. We're being outspent by the real estate industry, by, big oil, by other business interests. And it's not even just from California, because the folks that actually own commercial property in California are not necessarily from California. I mentioned the president, but there's folks all around. There's large, property holding companies based in Hong Kong that are saving tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars every year. And so we have an opportunity to have those folks pay their fair share by voting yes on Prop 15, but we also need to be reaching out. We need to be talking to our friends, our family, and our neighbors about this issue. It's just absolutely critical because no matter what they do on TV, if folks hear 3 times from people that they trust that this is an initiative that is not going to change their property taxes, that's not going to increase taxes on them at all, and that is actually just going to affect a small number of commercial property owners while bringing in billions of dollars at a time when we desperately need it, they will vote yes and we will win. But if we are not out there advocating for this, if we're not talking to our friends, our family, and our neighbors about this, then we will probably lose. So that is sort of my ask to you all is talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk to your neighbors, talk to your coworkers about this. Please visit our website. We have a lot of information about this initiative that goes into more depth on, specifically, how all this is really tied into almost everything in California. Sign up for a phone bank. Emily can put the links to these things in the chat for you. We also are looking for folks to share their story. When we talk about our values, we really need to hear from individuals who feel like, yes, this is I'm voting for this as a homeowner because of X, Y, or Z. I think this is just the right thing to do. It's been too long that we've had this property tax loophole that nobody else has had. And right now I'm voting for this as a homeowner, or I'm voting for this as a senior. We need to sort of push back on this narrative that seniors, retirees, that homeowners aren't going to support this. So we're really looking for folks to share their stories as well of why they support this. And last of all, our organization is a grassroots organization. We are funded 100% by individual donations from folks, and that helps us be out there and continue to fight this fight, and helps people like me and Emily be here this evening to share with you all this information and hopefully inspire you all to get involved. So making a donation would have a huge impact as well if you're unable to help and volunteer in other ways. So I will stop the share of my screen now and pause, and I'm happy to take any questions that folks might have. So if, Emily, would you mind unmuting some folks?
Ben, in another presentation I saw you give, you talked a little bit about California had this tax revolution, and then like 40 some odd other states. Could you, and none of them. Could you? I don't remember exactly how it went.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to save that for the Q&A because it's all. But no, this is perfect. I think you bring up a great point. You know, folks here, I imagine you know some folks were around when Prop 13 passed. They kind of remember that anti-tax revolt. They you know, folks here in the Bay Area might not have voted for Prop 13, but you know most folks did all across the state. And really, what it did is it started an anti-tax revolt across the country. Right? Ronald Reagan wrote in his autobiography that it started a prairie fire across the country. In the 2 years after Prop 13 passed, 43 other pieces of legislation were passed that were copycats to Prop 13. So it hasn't just affected our state, it affected the entire country. But not one of those initiatives included commercial property. That is how out of step California is and was at the time, right? Not one other place was like, oh, well, we're not going to go that far. Because why would you? You know, if you are fortunate enough to own large commercial property, you should be taxed at fair market value. At least that's what the rest of the country feels. And so it's really up to us to say, yes, we feel that way too. Because for too long, we have had this other bizarre system. And again, like I was saying before, you know, we like to think of ourselves as so progressive, but it's like, so why are we the only ones to have done this? We finally have an opportunity to change that on November 3rd.
I just made the settings so that people are able to unmute themselves to ask questions.
Judy, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to suggest that Ben could maybe start with, there are questions in the chat. So that might be a good place to start.
Oh,
And
certainly.
I also wanted to say, you know, one of the things that's always bothered me that people don't seem to be aware of is the example you gave about the Dells and not owning 50% of the property. I mean, that's a clear way that they've gotten around this, and it's particularly egregious to me. I mean, it's just one of those things that just, you know, we have a system and there's a loophole and they're getting around it. So
Yeah, they really are. And you know, we like to use the Dells as a good example because they are so wealthy, but we have so many examples of this. You know, actually the Twitter building was recently purchased for $900 million, but they're still paying property taxes based on when it was previously purchased for $400 million. So that's an enormous amount of money that we are losing every single year that, you know, we obviously need now more than ever. So someone asked, if Prop 13 passes, how often would commercial property be reassessed? Great question. It would be reassessed every 3 years. And then someone asked, so the 50% loophole is closed simply by reassessing property based on the market value rather than how many people might own the property. So if we base it on market value like they do everywhere else, then it really doesn't matter how many people might purchase the property. It'll just be based on what the fair market value is. So in terms of the oversight of the funds, so again, we know exactly, or we have estimates of exactly how much money will be going to, you know, cities and counties and school districts. And so those local elected bodies will get to decide what they do with those funds. Some of the money is going directly to, you know, other special districts. I mentioned fire districts and water district, but also BART gets a chunk of money, you know, Muni, you know, gets the money. So a lot of it is just going to specific formulas. We're not changing anything about the funding formulas we currently have in California. All we're simply doing is just adding more money that will then flow to those formulas. But again, each one of these entities will have to report publicly what they're doing with this extra revenue every year. Wendy, do you have a comment? Wendy?
Oh, hi. I just wanted to let people know that yesterday I did a training on the relational organizing tool that you guys are using. So it's not a phone bank, it's not text banking where you're getting in touch with voters you don't know. But so I got trained on the app to do outreach to basically all of your friends and family that you feel comfortable contacting to gauge their, to see what their level of support is. So I don't know whether you guys want to talk. I don't know if one of the links that Emily put in includes that. That was through San Francisco Rising. And
yeah, certainly. That's a great point. One of the things that we're using is Outreach Circle.
Right.
Which is something which is really great. It's through your phone, and so it's an app that allows you to contact folks in your contacts. So instead of doing a cold call or a cold text to people you don't know, you can send a specific message about this initiative to your contacts. So that's also a great thing, and that's something that if folks are interested, they can definitely sign up for on our website, because I think it's a great tool. I really do, because again, it's about contacting the folks that we all know.
Right. I just wanted to add. So I'm doing like 10 friends a day, and I've already just had really, really positive responses. Like, oh, of course I'm supporting that. Like, so it's been very uplifting. Of course, that might be my little cone of leftyism, but in any event.
Well, I think that's good, and I think at this time especially is, if we weren't going to reach out to some of our folks who might not be as progressive or lefty as you put it as us, now is definitely the time. And so I'm sure we all have folks on our phone that maybe don't share our values, but it's important to reach out to them as well and sort of let them know at least the facts about this initiative, because there's so much misinformation out there, and it's critical that they at least understand. I've talked to so many people who at the beginning of the conversation they're against it, and then I just talked to them for a couple of minutes, 5 minutes maybe, and like, oh, I thought it was going to do X, Y, or Z. It's like, no, not at all. I was speaking with the assessor of Sacramento County the other day, and she was like, "Oh, I oppose this because we're going to have to start reassessing hospitals and churches." I was like, "What are you talking about?" But she never read the initiative. She just had sort of assumed. She's like, "Oh, I know it's not residential properties, but I assumed it was all these others." And really, the fact of the matter is, we could never do that. we would lose by an enormous amount if we wanted to. But also, any property now that is currently not paying property taxes will not have to pay property tax under Prop 15. But if you are currently paying property taxes and you're a commercial and industrial property and you are valued at more than $3 million, you will have to start paying fair market value of property taxes. Someone asked a question about the relation between Prop 15 and Prop 19. So please explain why offsite landlords would not raise commercial rents when they're asked to pay higher taxes. So there's really no relationship between our campaign and Prop 19. Prop 19 is put on the ballot by the California Realtors Association. They oppose our initiative, so really we're not working in coordination at all on that. In terms of rents, rents are based on the market. They're not based on the property taxes being paid by a landlord. If they were, then we would have drastically different rents, in every building in San Francisco based on what they were paying property taxes at. And especially now, where commercial landlords are struggling to fill their spaces as people move to work from home. This is not something where commercial landlords can turn around and say, okay, well, I'm going to double your rent right now. just, to share some information about our organization, our landlord offered to drop our rent by 30% to stay on. So the idea that they would have to start paying fair market value property taxes and then increase rents on everyone, it just doesn't make any sense, because their business is renting their space. And if they're charging too high of a price to rent their space, then they're not making any money. And in fact, we see so much blight in our community, so many empty storefronts everywhere. And part of the reason is because commercial landlords are not incentivized to actually fill up their space, because they're not paying property taxes at fair market value. If you're paying very little every year in property taxes, you don't have an incentive to rent your space. Right? You have an incentive to hold on to that land as long as you can and wait until you can get a Starbucks or a T-Mobile or some bigger corporation that can afford to pay whatever rents you're asking to move in. And so that hurts our small businesses, that really hurts our communities. But if we actually have them pay their fair share, like they would anywhere else, and sort of let the market work, then they're going to be wanting to fill that space. See if there's any other questions here. If this passes, the initiative is going to be phased in. So we'll start reassessing properties in 2022, but properties that have a majority of small business tenants, that process won't start until 2025, 2026 at the earliest, because you really want to phase this in. And again, 92% of the revenue is coming from just 10% of commercial properties in California. So if we just focus on that 10% of commercial properties, we're getting 92% of what we need for our schools and communities. So we can take as long as we need to get that last 8% of the revenue, and as long as assessors need to make sure that this can be brought on quickly. I'm just scanning through the questions here. And if anyone does have any questions, feel free to come off mute and ask. Someone asked about lawn signs. That is something where we have downloadable lawn signs for folks who are interested, and we can put that in the chat, a link to do that. Really more window signs.
So there was a question before about Prop 19. I think you confused 19 and 21. 21 is about rent control. 19 was changing certain property tax rules when property changes hands, say for seniors.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and again, we have nothing to do with that particular initiative. That was put on by the Realtors Association.
No, it was not put on by the Realtors.
We're not coordinating.
Prop 19 was not put on by the Realtors. That was passed by the legislature.
The Realtors had already collected signatures to put it on, and this is sort of the compromise initiative for folks. They had attempted to do this 2 years ago, and it lost by 20 points. So they still wanted to do this again. And so they sort of had a compromise in the legislature to put this on to make it a little more palatable to voters. But it's not something that we're not coordinating or anything. They're kind of doing their own campaign, and we're doing ours.
Okay.
Any other questions at all from folks? I'd be curious, like just a show of, the thumbs up. Does this sound like some people are willing to support? Fantastic, great. How about, are folks willing to get involved in some way? Excellent. So there are a few less thumbs, but I think, really we are at a crossroads right now for so many things. I've said for a long time that this is the second most important thing on the ballot in the country. We know what the most important thing is, but this is the second most important thing, and it's because of what I mentioned before is we would not have the situation we have now in this country if it wasn't for what Howard Jarvis was able to do in 1978, and if it wasn't for that anti-tax revolt that was started here. And the reason this is so important to change is that was the first time in the history of the country that we had ever decided to cut funding for services, just like that. There was, and it's so hard to remember this time, I understand, because we're at a very different moment now, but there was a time when Republicans and Democrats had different opinions on the role of government, but they still agreed to keep the lights on. But this gave the right and the Republicans the first realization that they actually don't need to care about that anymore. And they can just move forward with their drown government in a bathtub philosophy. But prior to 1978 and Prop 13, that was not something that was agreed upon. But because Howard Jarvis did so well, because he was really like the original Donald Trump, running a populist campaign as a commercial property tax owner, saying, I'm doing this for you, but really not talking too much about the fact that this is a huge giveaway to commercial property. Because in California, homes change hands on average every 10 years, right? But large commercial property owners don't. I talk to people, if we don't do this, Disneyland is going to be paying the same property taxes that they're paying now when your grandkids are taking their grandkids to Disneyland, right? That absolutely makes no sense. So this is something that's very important, and is being talked about outside of California, because people outside of California know Prop 13. It's very difficult to sort of think of any other ballot measures from any other states, but people know Prop 13 because it had such a monumental impact on the country. And we have a big opportunity now to roll back the most egregious problems with Prop 13. But in order to do that, we do need help, right? We need folks to just, commit to, joining one phone bank, to, chip in whatever they can, to share their story, to commit to telling their friends and neighbors about this, to download a window sign, whatever it might be. Because if we're able to do this, then we have a rare opportunity to actually make sure that the cuts that we're going to be facing next year, and there will be tremendous cuts. And we're talking about a $54 million budget deficit at the state level, right? We're talking about $2 billion budget deficit here in San Francisco. And that's because we rely so heavily on taxes that we just haven't been able to collect this year, or will collect at such a lower rate than we did last year. We rely so heavily in San Francisco on the hotel tax. How much money do we think we're going to be bringing in from the hotel tax in 2020? And I often talk to folks too, is exactly zero. Is we had tremendous issues before this pandemic. We had tremendous issues. We all know what they were, what they are. And now, after this pandemic, what are we going to do? Well, here in California, we have a huge opportunity. We have an opportunity to actually generate billions of dollars, not just to get us through the next 5 or 10 years of bouncing back from this recession, but also to have reliable, stable revenue coming in from here on out. So that's what Prop 15 is all about. So I really, thank you all for your time tonight. Really, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much, Margot, for hosting this. It really, really means a lot. I love presenting to different groups, and I often hope if I'm able to present to all these folks tonight, that you'll at least talk to 5 other people, and then we can start spreading the word this way. I see one last question here. Is there a minimum value of commercial property subject to this tax? Yes, it would be $3 million. And how do nonprofits fit into the designation of commercial property? So if you are a property that is currently not paying property taxes, so if you're a hospital, or you're a school, or you're a church, or other house of worship, you will not be affected by this at all. But if you are paying property taxes and your property is commercial industrial and it's valued over $3 million, then it certainly would be taxed. And then the last thing that I will leave you all with is Prop 15 generates $390 million every year for our fire districts, because we are woefully underprepared to combat what we have right now with these unprecedented wildfires. And so if we find folks that don't really care about our schools, don't really care about some of the other services, please tell them that. $390 million every single year going directly to our fire services. Again, without increasing our taxes, because we have decimated funding for fire protection and public safety over the last 42 years. This is a big step in the right direction. to make sure we can actually get close to being able to combat what we're seeing now and what we unfortunately will see in the foreseeable future. So again, thank you, Margot. Thank you all for being here tonight. Again, Lashana Tova, and I hope some of you can get involved in the campaign. Take care.
Take it. Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you for that scary thought at the end. and thank you for clarifying that for us. And I want everyone to know that if you registered for this, and I assume you did, we're sending an email out probably by tomorrow with the links to different things you can do, phone banking, download window signs, and also a link to the recording of this so that if you have friends that you'd like to refer to it, you can send them a link for that. So thanks again for coming. Thank you for your time. Thank you for anything you can do to help with Prop 15.
Thank you.
Thanks for organizing it, Margot.
You're welcome. Thank you all for coming.
Great job, Margot. Thank you.
Thank you. This was great.
Terrific presentation.
Thank
you.
Margot.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thanks, Margot.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I learned a lot.
Thank you, Betsy. Okay. I'm gonna end the meeting here. Good night, everybody.